Samuel Hayes thought he'd seen the worst of what men could do to each other during the war, but nothing prepared him for what he found tied to his fence that cold Wyoming morning. The rope burns on her wrists told a story he didn't want to believe. A 16-year-old girl, unconscious, abandoned like discarded livestock on his property line. Her dress was torn, her lips cracked from thirst, and she'd been there long enough for the morning frost to settle on her dark hair. Samuel knelt beside her, his weathered hands trembling as he cut through the rope. 20 years of solitary living on this ranch. And now this. The girl stirred as the bonds fell away, her eyes snapping open with the wild fear of a cornered animal. She scrambled backward. "Don't touch me," she gasped. But Samuel had already seen the bruises on her arms, the way she favored her left side. Someone had hurt this child before abandoning her. His jaw tightened as he recognized the signs he'd tried so hard to forget from his own childhood. "Easy now," he said, keeping his distance. "I'm not going to hurt you." She studied his face, searching for lies. Samuel Hayes was a big man made bigger by 20 years of ranch work, but something in his gray eyes must have convinced her. She didn't run. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma." She whispered the word like a confession. Samuel glanced at the rope still in his hands, then at the wheel tracks leading away from his fence. Someone had driven her here in the middle of the night and left her to die. In Wyoming territory, that meant wolves, cold, or worse. "Who did this to you?" Emma's face went blank. Not the confusion of someone who couldn't remember, but the careful emptiness of someone who remembered too much. "My father," she whispered. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. He'd spent 2 decades running from his own father's memory, and now it was staring back at him through this girl's haunted eyes. Samuel stood slowly, his mind racing. He could take her to town, hand her over to the sheriff. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But Sheriff Morrison was a company man who asked few questions when it came to family matters, and Emma would end up back with whoever had done this. Or worse. "Can you walk?" he asked. Emma nodded and struggled to her feet. Samuel watched her rise, noting how she held herself like someone expecting another blow. He made his decision. "Come on, then. Let's get you inside." But as they walked toward his cabin, Samuel caught sight of dust clouds on the horizon. Someone was coming fast, and something told him they weren't bringing good news. The dust clouds were still miles away, but Samuel had learned to read the prairie like other men read books. 3 riders, moving with the urgency of men on a mission. He had maybe 20 minutes before they reached his property. Inside the cabin, Emma sat rigid at his kitchen table, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Samuel poured water from his pitcher into a tin cup and set it before her. "Drink slowly," he said. She obeyed, but her hands shook so badly the cup rattled against her teeth. Samuel had seen that kind of fear before, in the mirror every morning for the first 10 years after he'd run away from home. "Those riders coming," he said quietly, "they have anything to do with you?" Emma's cup froze halfway to her lips. The look that crossed her face told Samuel everything he needed to know. "He's coming back for me," she whispered. Samuel moved to the window, studying the approaching dust cloud. "Your father." She nodded. "He said I was payment for his debts. Then he changed his mind. Said I wasn't worth enough. That I'd bring shame to whoever took me." The words hit Samuel like stones. He remembered his own father's voice, slurred with whiskey, explaining how children were burdens that smart men learned to shed. "So he tied you to my fence to die?" Emma nodded. "Said the wolves would clean up his mistake." Samuel felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, but the familiar weight of a decision that would change everything. He'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of trouble, keeping his head down, his business to himself. But looking at Emma, seeing his own childhood written in her terrified eyes, he knew he was done running. "Well," he said, checking the rifle hanging above the fireplace, "looks like your father miscalculated." Emma stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "You don't understand. He's not alone. He owes money to dangerous men, and they're coming with him." Samuel turned from the window. "How dangerous?" "The kind that burn farms and don't ask questions." The dust cloud was closer now. Samuel could make out individual riders. 3 men riding hard, and one of them was leading a rope that dragged something behind his horse. Samuel's blood went cold. It was a message meant for him. They'd killed one of his cattle and dragged the carcass behind them as a warning. "They want you to know what happens to people who interfere," Emma said, reading his expression. Samuel walked to his gun cabinet and pulled out his Winchester. 20 years of peace on this ranch. And now it was ending, because he couldn't walk away from a child in trouble. But as he loaded the rifle, Samuel realized something that surprised him. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt like himself again. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "you know how to shoot?" She shook her head. "Then you're about to learn." The 3 riders stopped just outside rifle range. Close enough for Samuel to see their faces, but far enough to avoid his bullets. Smart men. Experienced in this kind of work. The man in the center was thick-set with graying hair and clothes that had seen too many saloons. That had to be Emma's father. The other 2 were younger, harder-looking, with the cold eyes of men who killed for money. "Hayes," the older man shouted. "I know you got my daughter in there." Samuel stepped onto his porch, Winchester in hand. Emma was at the back window with his old Colt. Her hands were steadier now that she had something to do besides fear. "She's not your daughter anymore," Samuel called back. "You forfeited that right when you tied her to a fence." The man's laugh was ugly. "That little girl belongs to me until I say different. Hand her over and we'll call it even." Samuel felt his finger tighten on the trigger but forced himself to stay calm. These weren't random drifters. They had the confidence of men backed by real power. "Who are you working for?" Samuel asked. One of the younger men answered. "Marcus Develin sends his regards." Samuel's blood turned to ice. Every rancher within 100 miles knew that name. Develin owned half the territory through fear, and the other half through bullets. If Emma's father owed Develin money, this wasn't just about a runaway girl anymore. "Develin wants his property back," the gunman said coldly. "The girl was collateral on a debt. Her daddy here decided to dispose of the merchandise instead of paying up." Emma's father shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "She ain't worth what he was asking." "Damaged goods. That's for Mr. Develin to decide," the gunman replied. "But he's willing to be reasonable. Hand over the girl, and Hayes here can keep his ranch. Hell, he can even keep breathing." Samuel looked back toward the cabin window where Emma waited. She was 16 years old, and these men were talking about her like livestock. Collateral. Property. Damaged goods. The same words his own father had used. "And if I refuse?" Samuel asked. The lead gunman smiled. "Then we take the girl anyway, and you become another tragic story about what happens to folks who interfere with Mr. Develin's business." Samuel glanced at the dead steer they dragged to his fence line. The message was clear. Develin had resources, men, and a reputation that had kept the territory in line for 5 years. But as Samuel looked at the 3 riders, he realized something important. They were talking instead of shooting. That meant Develin wanted to avoid a bloodbath, at least for now. "I need time to think," Samuel called out. "You got 1 hour," the gunman replied. "Then we come calling, and we won't be asking politely." As the riders pulled back to wait, Samuel felt Emma's presence behind him. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something I didn't tell you about Develin." Samuel turned, and the look in her eyes told him everything was about to get much worse. Inside the cabin, Emma kept her voice low. "Develin isn't just collecting a debt," she said. "He's my real father." Samuel sat down slowly, the weight of her words sinking in like a bullet through the ribs. "The man outside," Emma continued, "the one who tied me to the fence, that's my stepfather, Thomas Garrett. He married my mother when I was small, after Develin threw us out." Samuel felt pieces clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. "When I turned 16 last month, Develin decided he wanted me back. Not as a daughter." Emma's hands clenched into fists. Thomas owed him money from a poker game. Develin offered to forgive the debt in exchange for me. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Develin during the war, powerful men who took whatever they wanted and called it business. "But Thomas got scared," Emma went on. He said if Develin found out what he'd been doing to me all these years, Develin would kill him for damaging his property. The room went silent. Samuel finally understood why Emma had that haunted look in her eyes. Why she flinched at sudden movements. Thomas Garrett wasn't just a coward. He was a monster. So instead of facing Develin's anger, Samuel said slowly, he decided to let you die. Emma nodded. Make it look like I ran away and got killed by wolves. Then he could claim the girl was dead when the debt came due. Samuel walked to the window and stared at the riders still waiting beyond his fence. But now he saw things differently. This wasn't just about protecting a runaway girl from her stepfather. This was about keeping her away from a man who'd already thrown her away once, and now wanted to own her for real. There's more, Emma said. Develin doesn't know Thomas has been hurting me. If he finds out, he'll kill Thomas. But he'll still take me. Samuel turned to her. And you'd rather die than go with either of them? Wouldn't you? She asked. The question hung in the air. Samuel thought of his own past. Of the beatings. The hunger. The silence. He'd run away at 17 and spent 20 years building a life where no one could hurt him. Emma, he said quietly, there's something you should know. She looked up at him, waiting. My father sold me when I was 15. Said I was payment for a gambling debt. I spent 2 years as another man's property before I found the courage to run. Emma's eyes widened. The scars on my back, Samuel continued. They're from Crawford's whip. I've lived alone for 20 years because I swore no one would ever have power over me again. From outside came a shout. Time's almost up, Hayes. Samuel looked at Emma. He saw his own younger self in her, terrified, alone, with nowhere to go. What are you thinking? She whispered. Samuel picked up his rifle. I'm thinking it's time I stopped running. Samuel stepped onto his porch, rifle ready. The hour was up, and the 3 riders were already moving closer, their horses' hooves drumming against the hard-packed earth. Time's up, Hayes, Thomas Garrett called out. Hand over the girl, and we'll ride out peaceful. Can't do that, Samuel replied, his voice carrying across the wind-swept prairie. The lead gunman, lean and dead-eyed, nudged his horse forward. Then you've chosen poorly. But before anyone could draw iron, the thunder of galloping hooves echoed from the ridge behind Samuel's cabin. More riders, at least 6, rushed toward the standoff. Thomas Garrett's face went pale. He wasn't supposed to come himself, Samuel muttered. Marcus Develin rode like a man who owned the world, tall in the saddle, silver-haired, flanked by hardened men with polished weapons and cold stares. His coat was too fine for the wilderness, his boots too clean. He looked like power. Well, well, Develin said as his horse stepped around the carcass of the dead steer. What do we have here? Thomas Garrett's voice cracked. Mr. Develin, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Thomas. Develin's tone was velvet and venom. But first, I'd like to hear from Mr. Hayes. He turned to Samuel with pale, sharp eyes. I understand you have something that belongs to me. Samuel kept his rifle trained on the original 3, even as Develin's men fanned out behind him. Nothing here belongs to you, Samuel said. Develin smiled, cold and calculating. I'm afraid you're mistaken. Thomas here owes me a considerable sum of money, and the collateral for that debt is currently hiding in your cabin. She's not collateral. She's a human being. Develin's smile vanished. Emma, he said, almost spitting the name, is that what she's calling herself now? The way he said it made Samuel's skin crawl. This wasn't business. This was personal, possessive, twisted. I think it's time we sorted this out properly, Develin continued. Thomas, you lying snake. Did you really think you could let my daughter die and I wouldn't find out? The words hung in the air like thunder. Develin had known all along. Emma was his daughter. She ain't worth the trouble, Mr. Develin. Thomas stammered. I was doing you a favor. Develin's revolver was out and firing before the sentence ended. The shot slammed into Thomas's shoulder, sending him toppling from the saddle. Nobody asked you to think, Thomas. Samuel's heart pounded. This wasn't mercy. This was ownership, reasserted through violence. Develin looked back toward the cabin. "Let's discuss this like civilized men," he said. "I want my daughter back, Mr. Hayes, and I'm prepared to be generous." Inside, glass shattered. Emma was running. Gun hands reached for iron. Samuel spun, torn between covering Emma's escape and facing down Develin's gang. Bullets tore into the porch as he dove behind the water trough. His Winchester cracked twice. One rider dropped, another fell from his saddle. But 7 remained. "Enough!" Develin's voice thundered. "I want her alive, you idiots!" The gunfire stopped. Horses stamped nervously. Samuel crouched behind the trough, heart hammering. "Hayes," Develin called out. "This is pointless. She can't outrun horses, and there's nowhere to hide on this prairie. Surrender now, and I'll let you live." Samuel glanced around the trough. 2 men were flanking him, rifles ready. "What do you want with her?" he shouted. "She's my blood. My responsibility." The words rang hollow. Samuel heard returning hooves. Emma's pursuers were coming back. "Boss!" one of them yelled. "She's holed up in the rocks behind the ridge. She's got a gun. And she knows how to use it." Samuel allowed himself a flicker of pride. "Stubborn girl. Just like her mother," Develin muttered, jaw tightening. Samuel saw his opportunity. While Develin was distracted, he sprinted for the cabin. Bullets chased him. He slammed into the wall, breathing hard. "I have 20 more men an hour's ride from here," Develin shouted. "When they arrive, this ends badly for everyone." Samuel believed him. But something in Develin's voice said he didn't want to wait. "Why not just let her go?" Samuel shouted. "You threw her away once. Why is she so important now?" Silence. Then, Develin answered. "Because she's the only family I have left. And because 16 years ago, I let pride keep me from claiming what was mine. I won't make that mistake twice." From the ridge, Emma's rifle cracked. A man screamed and hit the ground. 8 left. Samuel peeked around the cabin corner and saw something that turned his blood to ice. Dynamite. Develin struck a match. "Last chance, Hayes," he called. "Convince her to come down, or I'll blast those rocks apart, with her in them." The fuse sizzled, burning steadily. Samuel stepped from behind the cabin, hands raised. "Emma!" he shouted toward the ridge. "Come down." Her voice came sharp and defiant. "I'd rather die up here." "No." Samuel's voice cracked. "There's another way." Maybe 30 seconds left on the fuse. Then he saw it, the one thing Develin hadn't considered. "Develin!" Samuel shouted. "You throw that dynamite, and you'll never know the truth about what Thomas did to her." The fuse burned lower. "What truth?" Develin snapped, eyes narrowing. "Why do you think Thomas was so eager to get rid of her?" Samuel demanded. "What do you think he's been doing to your daughter for the past 6 years?" A flicker of horror passed through Develin's face. His hand shot toward the fuse, but it was too late. Samuel lunged, slamming into him just as he tried to throw the dynamite. The stick flew, exploding harmlessly in the open prairie, spraying dirt and smoke. When the dust settled, Samuel was staring down the barrel of Develin's Colt, but the man's eyes weren't on him. They were on Thomas Garrett, who was crawling through the dirt, bleeding and terrified. "Thomas," Develin said, voice deadly quiet. "Come here." What followed was swift and brutal. Develin shot him twice, cold, controlled, deliberate. Then silence. Samuel waited, expecting more bloodshed. Instead, Develin looked up toward the ridge. "Emma," he called, his voice cracking, "I'm sorry." "I'm not coming down," she shouted. "I know," Develin said. "And I'm not asking you to." He mounted his horse slowly, every movement weighted with guilt. "She's not safe as long as I'm alive," he said quietly to Samuel. "Men like me don't change." He reached into his coat, pulled out a thick envelope, and tossed it to Samuel. "There's enough money there to take her far from here. Start over somewhere. I'll never look for her." "Why?" Samuel asked. Develin looked once more toward the rocks. "Because 16 years ago, I failed to be her father. Today you succeeded." He turned his horse and rode off. His men followed without a word. 1 hour later, Emma came down from the ridge. They buried Thomas Garrett without ceremony, packed what little they owned. By sunset, they were riding toward Colorado, toward a future neither of them had dared to imagine that morning. Behind them, the Wyoming prairie stretched empty and vast, holding its secrets in the gathering dark.